My name is Moses, and I just turned 35 today. I spent weeks planning the perfect birthday celebration, hanging streamers, and blowing balloons for a family that never arrived. When 3 hours passed with empty chairs and cooling food, I finally called my mom. Her laugh cut deeper than any knife. "Oh, we had more important plans," she said casually. I felt that familiar ache spreading through my chest, but something was different this time. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and get ready for a birthday tale that changed everything about my family forever. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I always felt like the overlooked Anderson child. My father Richard was a renowned surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, his name frequently mentioned in medical journals and charity gala programs. My mother Diane commanded courtrooms as a corporate lawyer, her designer suits and quick wit making her a favorite among the city's elite. Between their demanding careers and social obligations, there was little time for a quiet, thoughtful boy who preferred books to baseball. Then there was my younger sister Abigail, 3 years my junior, but miles ahead in our parents' affections. She was the spitting image of our mother, with our father's ambition, a combination that earned her the spotlight at every family gathering. Her ballet recitals warranted canceled surgeries. Her debate team victories prompted champagne dinners. Meanwhile, my academic achievements collected dust in drawers, occasionally acknowledged with distracted nods and generic praise. "Good job, kiddo," my father would say, barely glancing up from his medical journals when I showed him straighter report cards. "That's nice." Moses, my mother, would respond when I won the state writing competition, her attention immediately returning to Abigail's outfit for her upcoming social event. I learned early to temper my expectations. The Christmas I received a generic gift card while Abigail unwrapped a laptop. The high school graduation where they left early to attend her dance competition. The college acceptance letter to Yale that warranted less excitement than Abigail making the cheerleading squad. These moments piled up like snowdrifts, gradually burying whatever warmth remained between us. After college, I escaped to Seattle, building a life, and eventually a marriage, far from Chicago's painful memories. For 10 years, I maintained minimal contact holiday calls and occasional visits that felt more like professional obligations than family reunions. Then came the divorce last year, a painful untangling of a relationship that had slowly suffocated under the weight of my unresolved family issues. The separation left me untethered, questioning everything about myself and my future. In what my therapist later called seeking closure, I made the decision to return to Chicago. Perhaps proximity would heal what distance could not. I found an apartment 20 minutes from my parents' house and a job teaching English at a local community college. Within weeks of my return, I established Sunday dinners at their house, a tentative bridge across our emotional gulf. These gatherings were awkward affairs, filled with surface-level conversations and carefully avoided topics. My father discussed hospital politics. My mother detailed legal cases. Abigail, now a marketing executive with a busy social calendar, occasionally graced us with her presence. I listened and nodded, offering bland updates about my classes and apartment renovations. "You seem different since coming back," my mother commented during one such dinner, studying me over her wine glass. "More settled," my father agreed, though neither could identify how or why. They were right, though not for reasons they understood. The years away had given me perspective. The divorce had forced me to examine my patterns. The therapy had taught me to recognize my worth independent of their validation. I was different, more grounded in myself, more determined to establish healthy relationships even with those who had hurt me most. When my 35th birthday approached, I saw an opportunity for a fresh start, a new decade of life, a chance to rewrite old scripts. I planned meticulously, sending formal invitations a month in advance to my parents Abigail and a few local friends. I called twice to confirm attendance, receiving distracted assurances from my mother that of course we'll be there, Moses. I chose menu items that held family significance. My grandmother's lasagna recipe, the garlic bread. My father always requested the tiramisu that reminded my mother of their honeymoon in Italy. I selected my parents' favorite wine, created a playlist featuring songs from family road trips, and even dug out old photo albums to spark conversations about happier times. This birthday feels important. I told Thomas, my closest friend since returning to Chicago, as we shopped for decorations. "Because it is," he replied, squeezing my shoulder. "You're rebuilding something. That takes courage." I believed him. I believed in the possibility of change, of recognition, of finally being seen by the people whose approval I had craved for 35 years. That belief carried me through weeks of preparation, through late nights, creating handmade decorations, through practice runs of complex recipes. My birthday would be the turning point, I decided. The day my family finally showed up for me, not just physically but emotionally. The day the overlooked son became the center of attention, if only for a few hours. The day that would heal decades of subtle rejection. I was ready for everything except the reality that awaited me. The morning of my 35th birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect April Saturday. I woke before my alarm, adrenaline and anticipation making sleep impossible. The day stretched before me with promise, each hour carefully mapped out to ensure the perfect celebration. I started with the lasagna, my grandmother's recipe, requiring hours of simmering to achieve the perfect flavor profile. The familiar scents of garlic, basil, and tomatoes filled my apartment, triggering childhood memories of rare, happy moments in my grandmother's kitchen, one of the few places I felt truly wanted. "You have the touch, Moses," she would say, letting me stir the sauce, while Abigail grew bored and wandered away. "Some people cook with their hands, but you cook with your heart." By noon, the food preparation was well underway. I moved to decorating, transforming my modest backyard into an intimate gathering space. String lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a canopy of soft illumination for when evening fell. The patio table, borrowed from Thomas, was covered with a crisp white tablecloth and set with the good dishes I had inherited from my grandmother. Each place setting included a small wrapped gift for my guests, a thank you for being part of my life. In the center stood a homemade birthday cake, 3 layers of vanilla sponge, with raspberry filling, my childhood favorite that my mother had rarely found time to make. Beside it, I placed the bottles of wine, my father's preferred Cabernet, and my mother's favorite Chardonnay. Every detail considered, every preference acknowledged. At 2 o'clock, I showered and dressed in a new blue button-down that brought out my eyes. I arranged the photo albums on the coffee table, selected music that would appeal to everyone, and placed extra chairs around the fire pit for after-dinner conversations. The gathering was set to begin at 4, giving everyone time to arrive, before we sat down to eat at 5. By 3:30, I was pacing, excitement, making it impossible to sit still. I imagined my parents' reaction to the transformed space, my mother's surprise at the attention to detail, my father's reluctant admission that I had created something special. I pictured Abigail's typically critical eye, finding nothing to fault, perhaps even feeling a flicker of admiration for her typically underestimated brother. At 4:15, I checked my phone for the first time, surprised to find no messages. Chicago traffic could be unpredictable, I reasoned. They were probably running late and would arrive any minute, full of apologies and birthday wishes. By 4:45, uneasiness had replaced anticipation. I sent a casual text to my mother, "Food's getting ready." ETA. The message showed as delivered but remained unanswered. 5 o'clock came and went. The lasagna, removed from the oven and resting on the counter, gradually stopped steaming. The garlic bread cooled and hardened. The carefully mixed salad began to wilt in its crystal bowl. At 5:30, I called my father's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message that aimed for casual but couldn't quite hide the strain in my voice. "Hey Dad, just wondering if you guys are on your way. Food's ready whenever you get here." 6 o'clock brought deepening shadows to the backyard and a heaviness to my chest that made breathing difficult. I poured myself a glass of my father's Cabernet and sat at the fully set table, surrounded by empty chairs. The string lights overhead blinked on automatically as darkness fell, illuminating a celebration with no guests. By 7, I had moved through denial and bargaining to a numb acceptance. My 35th birthday would be spent alone, like so many celebrations before it. Whatever fantasies I had harbored about reconciliation and recognition had been just that, fantasies. At 7:15, 3 hours after the scheduled start time, I finally called my mother's cell phone. My finger hovered over the screen for several seconds before pressing call. Each ring echoed the pounding in my chest. 1, 2, 3 rings, and then Moses. What is it? My mother's voice carried background, noise, music, and laughter, and clinking glasses. Mom, it's my birthday dinner tonight. Everyone's supposed to be here. Did something happen? There was a pause brief, but telling then her laugh light and dismissive. Oh my goodness, was that today I completely forgot with everything going on. The background noise grew louder. I heard my father's distinctive laugh, then Abigail's voice calling for my mother to return to the table. Where are you? I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. We're at the Springfield Country Club. The Robertsons invited us to their charity gala. You know how important these connections are for your father's practice, and my firm. I sat silently, the phone pressed painfully against my ear. Moses. Are you there? Yes, I managed. So you're not coming? Another laugh, this one slightly uncomfortable. Oh honey, we can't leave now. We're at the head table with the mayor. I'm sure you understand. Then, the words that would echo in my mind for days. Oh, we had more important plans? More important plans. More important than my birthday. More important than me. The words crystallized. 35 years of being secondary. An afterthought. An obligation, rather than a joy. Moses, my mother prompted, when I didn't respond. I understand, I said finally, my voice hollow even to my own ears. Enjoy your evening. We'll make it up to you next weekend, she offered, the easy promise of someone who rarely follows through. Maybe brunch on Sunday after church. Sure, Mom. Sounds great. The lie came easily, a reflex developed over decades of protecting myself from their indifference. Happy birthday, darling, she added almost as an afterthought before hanging up. I sat motionless, the phone still in my hand, surrounded by cooling food and cheerful decorations that now seemed to mock me. The string lights reflected in the untouched wine glasses, creating patterns that blurred as unwelcome tears filled my eyes. More important plans. The phrase repeated itself, a painful mantra that summarized my entire relationship with my family. There had always been more important plans than my school events, my graduations, my wedding. Now even my carefully planned birthday celebration couldn't compete with a last-minute social opportunity. I stood abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. The movement broke something inside me, releasing a flood of emotions that had been carefully contained for years. Anger, hurt, disappointment, resignation, all mingled together, creating a cocktail of pain that burned through my chest and threatened to overwhelm me completely. I don't know how long I sat alone at that perfectly set table, the empty chairs silently witnessing my humiliation. The food grew cold, the candles burned low, and the string lights blinked overhead like artificial stars indifferent to human suffering. The physical symptoms of emotional pain are rarely discussed, but they're real. The tightness in my chest made each breath shallow and unsatisfying. The pressure behind my eyes threatened tears I refused to shed. My stomach clenched into knots, rejecting the idea of food, despite having eaten nothing since breakfast. As the initial shock-faded memories surfaced unbidden, my 10th birthday when my parents arrived 2 hours late to my party because Abigail's dance rehearsal ran long. My high school graduation when they left immediately after the ceremony to attend a hospital fundraiser, missing the dinner I had reserved weeks in advance. My wedding day when my father checked his phone repeatedly during photos, and my mother spent more time networking with guests than celebrating with me. Each recollection carried its own distinct pain, but the pattern was unmistakable. I had never been the priority, never been important enough to warrant their full attention or genuine effort. The evidence stretched across decades, undeniable in its consistency. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. How's the birthday bash going? Need me to bring anything? I stared at the message, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. Pride warred with loneliness. The thought of admitting what had happened, of revealing yet another family rejection, made my skin crawl with shame. Yet the prospect of spending the remainder of my birthday completely alone seemed equally unbearable. No one showed up, I typed finally. Family had more important plans. His response was immediate. I'm coming over. 20 minutes. Don't, I replied quickly. I'm not good company right now. Not asking for good company. Bringing beer. I placed the phone screen down on the table, torn between gratitude for his offer and embarrassment at needing rescue. The prospect of Thomas seeing the elaborate preparations for a party that never happened, the pathetic evidence of my misplaced hope, was almost as painful as the rejection itself. I poured another glass of wine, this time my mother's Chardonnay, and walked slowly around the backyard. The string lights created pools of warm light that seemed to emphasize the emptiness below them. The carefully arranged chairs waited for conversations that would never happen. The fire pit remained unlit, the wood, stacked neatly beside it, now purposeless. Inside wasn't any better. The photo albums I had spent hours organizing sat untouched on the coffee table. I flipped one open, confronting images of a younger, more hopeful version of myself. Family vacations where I stood slightly apart. School events where my parents looked distracted, holiday gatherings where the focus inevitably shifted to Abigail's achievements. Had I imagined the distance, manufactured the rejection to justify my own insecurities? The question surfaced briefly before being dismissed by decades of evidence. This wasn't about perception. It was about patterns consistent and undeniable. I closed the album and returned to the kitchen where the feast I had prepared sat abandoned. Hours of preparation, now destined for the trash. Another wave of anger swept through me, hot and cleansing. This time I welcomed it, preferring its sharp clarity to the dull ache of hurt. Why was I still seeking approval from people who had demonstrated repeatedly that I wasn't a priority? Why did I continue to set myself up for disappointment, creating opportunities for rejection, then acting surprised when rejection came? What did that pattern say about me, my self-worth, my understanding of love and family? I was halfway through the Chardonnay when the idea struck, emerging from the mix of wine, anger, and accumulated hurt. My gaze settled on the birthday setup, the physical evidence of both my effort and their indifference. In that moment, something shifted inside me, a tectonic movement that altered my emotional landscape. For 35 years I had been a passive recipient of their neglect, accepting each disappointment with resigned understanding. I had made excuses for their behavior, created justifications for their absence, shouldered the blame for their indifference. I had been complicit in my own erasure. The good son, who never caused trouble, never demanded attention, never rocked the carefully balanced family boat. What if just once I stopped accepting? What if I highlighted their failure rather than hiding it? What if I forced them to confront the reality of their choices, rather than enabling their convenient forgetfulness? The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing minute. My phone sat on the table, its camera unused, since taking pictures of the food preparation earlier. I picked it up, considering possibilities that would have seemed unthinkable hours before. Social media had never been my arena of choice. I posted occasionally, mainly to keep distant friends updated on major life events. My parents, however, were avid users, particularly my mother, whose carefully curated online presence showcased the perfect family, the successful career, the enviable social connections. What if I used her own medium to expose the reality behind that carefully constructed facade? What if I showed the world what family really meant in the Anderson household? The wine buzzed pleasantly in my veins as I stood up, newfound purpose, driving away the earlier lethargy of disappointment. I would not be a victim tonight. I would not sit alone in the dark, nursing wounds that would never heal because they were never acknowledged. For once in my life, I would control the narrative. I would force them to see what they had done, to confront their choices, not through my private pain, but through public exposure. The plan began to take shape, revenge and reclamation braided together into something that felt for the first time that evening like power. I began by assessing the scene with new eyes. The backyard setup was perfect, not as evidence of rejection, but as a backdrop for a different story entirely. The string lights created an ambient glow that any professional photographer would envy. The table settings gleamed, the food, though cold, looked magazine-worthy, and the decorations struck the perfect balance between festive and elegant. With methodical precision, I rearranged certain elements to better serve my purpose. I moved chairs to create the illusion of recent occupation, leaving one slightly angled away from the table as if someone had just stood up. I positioned wine glasses at varying levels of emptiness, suggesting ongoing consumption. I scattered napkins, casually placed serving spoons in the dishes, and cut slices from the birthday cake, removing them to empty plates around the table. The tripod for my camera, originally purchased for recording lectures at the college, became my accomplice. I set it up at strategic angles, capturing the scene from perspectives that implied a gathering rather than solitude. Each shot was carefully composed, telling a story of celebration and connection that existed only in carefully constructed frames. For the next hour, I moved between photographer and subject, using the timer to include myself in selected images. In some, I raised a glass toward unseen companions. In others, I laughed at unheard jokes. I created visual fragments of a party that never happened, pieces of evidence that taken together painted a picture of celebration rather than abandonment. Once satisfied with the photographic evidence, I turned to the most critical element, the social media post that would deliver this carefully crafted reality to my family and their extensive network. The caption required delicacy, suggestion rather than outright fabrication, implication rather than lies. I drafted and deleted several versions, each one evolving closer to the perfect balance of gratitude and subtle exclusion. The final text emerged after careful consideration. Overwhelmed by love, on my 35th birthday, some people are blessed with the family they're born into, others create the family they need along the way. Tonight I'm thankful for those who showed up not just today, but every day, who make me feel valued, seen, and loved. The laughter, stories, and genuine connections we shared tonight reminded me what real family means. Your presence was the greatest gift I could have received. Here's to the family we choose, and who choose us in return. Blessed real family birthday love. The words contained no outright lies. There was no specific mention of who attended, no false claims about my parents' presence, no fabricated stories about activities or gifts. Instead, it was a masterclass in implication, in strategic omission, in the power of what remained unsaid. I selected 5 photos that best supported the narrative, including one that captured me, blowing out candles on the cake, apparently surrounded by off-camera well-wishers. I tagged my actual friends Thomas and Rebecca, who lived nearby, as well as several colleagues from the college who had wished me happy birthday earlier in the day. Before posting, I sent a text to Thomas explaining what I was doing and why. Playing a bit of a game with my family. If you see a post about my birthday, just go with it. I'll explain later. His response came quickly, intrigued. Consider me your accomplice. I hesitated only briefly before hitting share. The post went live at 9:30, entering the digital ecosystem where my mother spent considerable time cultivating her online persona. The notification would likely reach her phone within moments, the content available for immediate consumption by her and her carefully maintained social network. Then I waited simultaneously, dreading and anticipating the repercussions of my small act of rebellion. Thomas texted again at 9:45. Saw the post. Playing my part. You okay? Getting there, I replied, which felt more honest than a simple yes or no. 10 minutes later, the notifications began. Friends and acquaintances liked the post, some leaving generic birthday wishes, others playing along with unexpected enthusiasm. Great seeing you tonight, Moses. Thanks for hosting. That cake was amazing. Recipe, please. Best birthday gathering of the year. Thanks for including us in your special day. Each comment built upon the illusion, creating a social proof that gave weight to my implied narrative. These people, many of whom I barely knew beyond casual workplace interactions, were inadvertently becoming allies in my quiet insurrection against years of familial neglect. At 10:30, my doorbell rang. Expecting Thomas, I was surprised to find both him and Rebecca standing on my porch, a 6-pack of craft beer in his hand and a small bakery box in hers. Reinforcements have arrived, Thomas announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Rebecca followed her expression, a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. We saw your post, she explained, placing the box on the counter. Figured you could use some actual celebration to go with your virtual one. The box contained cupcakes, each topped with a swirl of buttercream frosting and colorful sprinkles. Simple, thoughtful, genuine, everything my family's relationship with me was not. We can leave if you want space, Thomas offered, already opening beers. Or we can help you eat some of this feast and listen if you want to talk. The lump that formed in my throat caught me by surprise. After years of therapy, I recognized it as the body's physical response to unexpected kindness. the emotional equivalent of stepping into warmth after hours in the cold. "Stay." I managed accepting the beer he offered. "Please." As we moved to the backyard and settled around the table that had waited so long for occupants, my phone buzzed with a notification. Samuel, a colleague from the English department, was calling. "Just checking that you're okay," he said when I answered. "Your post seemed. I don't know." There was something between the lines. "Are you really having a good birthday?" The question, asked with genuine concern by someone I knew, primarily through faculty meetings, unleashed something inside me. The careful composure I had maintained throughout the evening cracked, allowing raw emotion to seep through. "Not really," I admitted, voice unsteady, "but it's getting better." "Want company?" I make a mean Manhattan, and I've been told I'm a decent listener. By 11, my solitary birthday had transformed into something entirely unexpected. Thomas, Rebecca, and Samuel sat around my backyard table, eating cold lasagna. They insisted was delicious, and listening as I finally spoke aloud the truth of my family relationships. The string lights overhead no longer seemed to mock me, but instead created a cocoon of warmth around this impromptu gathering of people who had shown up when it mattered. My phone continued to buzz with notifications as the post gained traction. Friends from college weighed in with birthday wishes. Former colleagues expressed surprise at not being invited. Distant relatives I barely knew commented about how festive everything looked. Conspicuously absent from the growing list of responses, my parents and sister. Their silence spoke volumes, a continuation of the pattern that had defined our relationship for decades. They were either oblivious to my digital presence or choosing to ignore what they saw, neither option surprising given our history. Little did I know that their silence was temporary, the calm before a storm that would arrive on my doorstep within hours. The improvised gathering with Thomas, Rebecca, and Samuel lasted until just after midnight. We finished the beer, demolished the cupcakes, and even managed to salvage some of the food I had prepared. Their presence transformed what had begun as the worst birthday of my life into something unexpectedly meaningful, a vivid illustration of the post's message about chosen family. After they left, I cleaned up the kitchen, putting away leftovers, and loading the dishwasher. The simple, mundane tasks helped ground me after the emotional roller coaster of the day. By 1:30 in the morning, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. I checked my phone one last time before heading to bed, noting with satisfaction that my post had accumulated over 60 likes and 20 comments. An unprecedented response rate for my typically quiet social media presence. Still nothing from my family. I had just changed into pajamas and was brushing my teeth when the doorbell rang, 3 sharp, demanding bursts that seemed to vibrate with urgency. Checking the time, 1:45 in the morning, I felt a surge of alarm. No one rang a doorbell at this hour with good news. Approaching cautiously, I peered through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. My father stood on the porch, his normally composed face contorted with anger. Behind him, my mother's rigid posture telegraphed controlled fury. Slightly apart from both, Abigail shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between our parents and the door. I considered pretending to be asleep, avoiding the confrontation, until morning when emotions might be less raw. But something in my father's stance suggested he would continue ringing, perhaps even resort to knocking or calling until he got a response. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door instinctively, stepping back to create distance between myself and their obvious anger. "What the hell is this?" my father demanded, without preamble, thrusting his phone toward me. On the screen, my birthday post glowed accusingly, the carefully staged photos evidence of my small rebellion. "It's my birthday post," I replied, aiming for casual, but hearing the defensive edge in my voice. "You know exactly what I mean," he snapped, stepping past me into the entryway without being invited. My mother followed her heels, clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Abigail entered last, closing the door gently behind her, her expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" my mother demanded, her lawyer voice in full effect. "The Robertsons saw it. Judge Callahan commented, 'Half my firm has liked it.'" The living room still showed evidence of my preparation, photo albums on the coffee table, gift bags by the couch, birthday cards displayed on the mantel. My parents took it all in, with quick assessing glances, neither acknowledging the effort these items represented. You deliberately set this up to embarrass us. My father continued pacing the small space like a caged animal. His face had flushed to a concerning shade of red, the vein in his forehead visibly pulsing, making it look like you had this wonderful birthday celebration when you knew we had an important event tonight. I had an important event too, I said quietly. My birthday dinner, which I invited you to a month ago, which you confirmed you would attend. Things come up, Moses. My mother interjected, her voice frosty. Adults understand that priorities shift. We can't drop everything for a birthday dinner. But you expect me to understand when you drop me for something better. I noted an observation rather than an accusation. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I'm talking about, my father exclaimed, gesturing widely. You're acting like a child trying to make us feel guilty with this performance. He jabbed a finger toward his phone again, creating some fictional party to make it look like we're terrible parents who forgot their son's birthday. You did forget, I pointed out. Mom literally said, "Was that today?" when I called. I misspoke, she insisted. I meant was the dinner today. Obviously, I knew it was your birthday. I sent you a text this morning. She hadn't, but arguing that point seemed futile. Instead, I asked the question that had been building since they arrived. Why are you here now? If the gala was so important, why leave it to come here at nearly 2 a.m? Because people are asking questions, my father exploded. People are wondering why we weren't in your precious photos if this was such a wonderful family gathering. The Hendersons asked if everything was okay with us. Dr. Phillips literally asked if we were having family problems. The truth emerged with brutal clarity. They weren't here because they were concerned about me, because they regretted missing my birthday, or because they wanted to make amends. They were here because I had disrupted the carefully constructed image they presented to the world. I had created a crack in the facade, and they had rushed to repair it before anyone could peer too deeply inside. So this visit isn't about my feelings, I clarified, a calm settling over me as the pieces aligned. It's about your reputation. Don't twist this around, my mother warned. You deliberately posted those photos to make us look bad. You tagged people we know. You knew exactly what you were doing. She was right, of course. I had known. That had been the point. But hearing her acknowledge it, hearing her concern directed entirely toward public perception rather than my private pain, confirmed what I had suspected for years but never fully accepted. I've spent my entire life being overlooked by you. I said, the words emerging with surprising steadiness. Birthdays, graduations, my wedding, my divorce, none of it warranted your full attention. There was always something more important. Someone more important. That's ridiculous, my father dismissed. We've supported you through everything. When I challenged, when did you ever put me first? When did my needs, my celebrations, my pain, ever take priority over a work event, a social opportunity, or Abigail's activities? Don't drag me into this, Abigail protested, speaking for the first time since arriving. I never asked them to miss your events. But you benefited from it, I replied, not unkindly. You were the sun, and I was lucky to catch the occasional ray of light that happened to bounce my way. This is absurd, my mother declared. We're not going to stand here in the middle of the night listening to you rewrite family history because you're upset about one missed dinner. It wasn't one dinner, I insisted, years of accumulated hurt lending intensity to my voice. It was a lifetime of dinners, events, achievements, and needs that weren't important enough. Tonight was just the final confirmation of where I stand in this family. Where you stand? My father repeated incredulously. We paid for your education. We helped with the down payment on your first house. We welcomed you back to Chicago after your marriage failed. How dare you accuse us of not supporting you? Money isn't support, I said. Presence is support. Attention is support. Actually showing up when you say you will, that's support. The conversation was spiraling, decades of unspoken grievances, surfacing too quickly to be properly addressed. Emotions ran hot, accusations flew, and beneath it all, painful truths that had long been ignored began to emerge. You were always so self-sufficient, my mother argued. Abigail needed more guidance, more attention. You seemed fine on your own. I wasn't fine, I countered. I adapted. I learned not to need what I couldn't have. And now you're punishing us for it, my father accused. creating this public spectacle to embarrass us because we missed one birthday. I didn't mention you in the post I pointed out. I talked about being with people who make me feel valued and seen. The fact that you automatically assumed that excluded you says more about our relationship than anything I posted. The observation landed like a slap, momentarily, silencing both my parents. In the brief quiet, Abigail stepped forward, her expression troubled. "He's not entirely wrong," she said cautiously. "We do always put other things ahead of Moses. We have for years." My parents turned to her with matching expressions of betrayal unaccustomed to their favorite child siding against them. The dynamic shifted perceptibly, alliances realigning in real time as family secrets and unspoken truths spilled into the open. "That's not true, Abigail," my mother insisted. "We've always supported both of you equally." "Mom," Abigail said gently, "you left his wedding reception early for a client dinner. Dad checked work emails during his graduation ceremony. You both forgot his 35th birthday for a last-minute gala invitation. If it had been my wedding, my graduation, my birthday, would you have made the same choices?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and unanswerable. My father's face had lost some of its angry flush confusion, replacing rage, as he struggled to process this unexpected challenge from his typically supportive daughter. "This isn't about comparing," he said finally. "This is about Moses deliberately trying to humiliate us online." Maybe Abigail conceded. Or maybe it's about him finally finding a way to make you notice him. The insight coming from the sibling, who had benefited most from our parents' imbalanced attention, landed with particular weight. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Abigail, mixed with surprise at her perception and willingness to speak up. The conversation had reached a critical juncture, the accumulated tensions of decades threatening to either break us apart entirely or forge something new from the fragments of our fractured family relationships. Which direction we would take remained uncertain as we stood facing each other in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of a birthday celebration that had never truly occurred. The silence that followed Abigail's observation stretched uncomfortably, each of us processing the seismic shift in our family dynamic. My father had sunk onto the couch, suddenly looking older than his 63 years. My mother remained standing, her posture rigid, but her expression less certain than before. Abigail moved to the window, creating physical distance from the tension while remaining emotionally present. I took a deep breath, recognizing the rare opportunity before me. For once, I had their full attention. For once, they were listening rather than dismissing. For once, the carefully maintained illusion of family harmony had cracked enough to allow truth to seep through. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your attention." I began, my voice quiet but steady. Getting straight A's, winning writing competitions, graduating with honors, securing tenure, each achievement was another attempt to be noticed, to be valued, to be prioritized, even briefly. My father started to speak, but I raised a hand, determined to finish. "When I was 8, you missed my school play because Abigail had a cold. Not pneumonia, not a serious illness, a cold. I had the lead role. I practiced for weeks. Neither of you showed up, but the next weekend, you took the entire family to Abigail's dance recital, where she was in the back row of a group number." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "We can't possibly remember every blank. When I was 16, I won the state writing competition. My teacher drove me to the ceremony because you had tickets to the symphony. When I was 22, I graduated summa cum laude from Yale, and you left immediately after the ceremony for a hospital fundraiser. You didn't even stay for the dinner I had reserved months in advance." The examples flowed freely now. Specific memories I had buried, but never forgotten. At my wedding, Dad checked his phone throughout the ceremony. "Mom, you spent the reception networking with guests who might be useful contacts. You left early for a client dinner, missing the cake cutting and our first dance." That client became the firm's biggest account, my mother interjected weakly. "And when my marriage ended, when I was at my lowest point, and moved back to Chicago hoping for support, you spent our first dinner together talking about Abigail's promotion and Dad's new research grant. You never once asked why my marriage failed, or how I was coping." My voice cracked slightly on the last example, the wound still fresh despite months of therapy. The vulnerability seemed to affect my parents more than the anger had, their defensive postures softening almost imperceptibly. Each time I told myself it was reasonable. You had important careers, you had social obligations, You had Abigail's needs to consider. I made excuses for your absence, justified your priorities, buried my disappointment under layers of understanding and rationalization. I gestured around the apartment at the evidence of the birthday celebration that never materialized. But tonight, something broke. After weeks of planning, after creating the perfect evening, designed specifically to appeal to each of you, after receiving your confirmation that you would be here, I sat alone at a table set for 4 and realized nothing would ever change. Unless I changed. My father cleared his throat, his typical confidence notably absent. Moses, we've supported you financially, provided opportunities. Money isn't love, Dad. Opportunities aren't presents. I didn't need college tuition as much as I needed you to look interested when I talked about my classes. I didn't need help with a down payment as much as I needed you to help me move in. I turned to my mother. I know your own parents were distant. I know you've repeated patterns you experienced growing up, but knowing that doesn't make it hurt less when history repeats itself through me. The observation visibly startled her. We rarely discussed her childhood or the emotional neglect she had experienced from parents who viewed children as obligations rather than blessings. The parallel between her experience and mine hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniable. "What do you want from us, Moses?" she asked finally, her lawyer's composure cracking to reveal genuine uncertainty. "What are you hoping to accomplish with this conversation?" The question was fair. Naming grievances without suggesting remedies risked becoming an exercise in blame rather than a path to healing. I had spent hours in therapy discussing exactly this question, clarifying what I needed versus what I wanted, what was possible versus what was ideal. "I want acknowledgement," I said simply. "I want you to recognize the pattern without defensiveness or justification. I want you to understand how it felt to always be secondary, to never be the priority, to arrange my life around the spaces you left available, rather than having you create space specifically for me." I paused, gathering courage for the next part. "I want the opportunity to forgive you, but that requires you to admit there's something that needs forgiving." My father stood abruptly, moving to the mantel where my birthday card stood displayed. He picked one up, reading the generic message inside, then set it down carefully. "I don't know how to be different than I am," he admitted. The vulnerability unprecedented from a man who built his identity on certainty and authority. "My career has always been everything. The validation, the status, the sense of purpose it filled, needs I didn't know how to fill otherwise." He turned to face me, his expression troubled. "Your mother and I, we're products of our generations, our families. We provided stability, education opportunities. We thought that was enough. That the rest, the emotional connection, would happen naturally." "It doesn't," I said quietly. "It requires intention, priority, presence." "You were so self-sufficient," my mother interjected, echoing her earlier comment. "You never seemed to need us the way Abigail did. You were quiet, capable, independent. It was easy to believe you were fine." I adapted to what was available, I clarified. I learned early that demanding attention led to disappointment, so I stopped demanding. That wasn't self-sufficiency, it was self-preservation. From her position by the window, Abigail spoke up. "I always envied that about you. You seemed so complete on your own, while I felt like I needed their approval for everything." The observation surprised me. From my perspective, she had been the golden child, the focus of attention and approval. The realization that she had her own struggles with our parents' conditional regard added another layer of complexity to our family dynamic. "I think," my father said slowly, "we may have failed both of you in different ways." The admission, however, qualified marked a significant shift. My father rarely acknowledged mistakes, particularly those touching on his core identity as a provider and parent. His willingness to consider failure, even hypothetically, suggested an opening where before there had been only defensive certainty. "We can't change the past," my mother added, practical, as always. "But perhaps we can be more mindful going forward." "That requires more than good intentions," I responded. "It requires actual change. Different priorities. Different choices when conflicts arise." I moved to the kitchen and returned with the invitation I had sent them. A month earlier, the one that had detailed the birthday dinner, they had confirmed, then forgotten. It means when you commit to something like this, you follow through unless there's a genuine emergency, not a better offer, not a networking opportunity, an actual emergency. And if we can't do that, my father asked the question, surprisingly direct. Then we need to be honest about the relationship we actually have, not the one we pretend to have at holidays and in social media posts. I'd rather have clear boundaries and realistic expectations than continual disappointment. The ultimatum hung in the air not as a threat, but as a recognition of reality. I was no longer willing to participate in the fiction of family closeness that existed primarily for external consumption. Either we would build something authentic with all the effort and commitment that required, or we would acknowledge the limitations of what we could offer each other. My mother moved to sit beside my father on the couch, her normally perfect posture softening as fatigue and emotion caught up with her. "Your father and I need to discuss this," she said finally. "This isn't something we can resolve in one conversation at 2 a.m. "I agree," I replied. "But I'm not interested in discussions that don't lead to actual change. I've had enough conversations that feel momentarily significant, but ultimately change nothing." Abigail stepped away from the window, moving to stand beside me in a small but meaningful gesture of solidarity. "I think Moses deserves better than what we've given him," she said quietly. "I think we all do." The simple statement delivered without drama or accusation seemed to affect our parents more deeply than my detailed catalog of grievances. They exchanged glances as silent communication honed through decades of marriage. "We should go," my father said finally. "It's late, and we've all had an emotional evening. We'll talk again when we've had time to process." It wasn't the dramatic resolution I might have imagined. No tearful apologies, no profound revelations, no promises of immediate transformation. Instead, it was something potentially more valuable, an acknowledgement that there was something to process, something that required thought rather than dismissal. As they prepared to leave, my mother paused at the door. "Your birthday dinner," she said hesitantly. "Perhaps we could reschedule for next weekend." The offer represented a small step, an initial attempt to address the immediate wound, if not the systemic pattern. I considered declining, protecting myself from the possibility of another disappointment. But growth required risk from all sides. "Saturday at 5, I said. "I'll send a reminder." She nodded, accepting both the opportunity and the implicit acknowledgement that reminders were necessary. "Happy birthday, Moses," she added the wish, belated, but seemingly sincere. After they left, Abigail lingered, studying me with new interest. "That took courage," she observed, "standing up to them like that." "It took desperation," I corrected. "And about 30 therapy sessions." She smiled slightly. Either way, it was overdue. She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I was part of the problem. I didn't realize how much I benefited from their attention at your expense." The apology, unexpected and unasked for, touched me more deeply than I anticipated. "You were a child seeking love from available sources," I said. "That's not something that needs forgiveness." Before leaving, she hugged me awkwardly, the physical contact rare between us as adults. "Next year," she promised, "I'll make sure your birthday is properly celebrated, with or without them." As I closed the door behind her, the apartment felt different, emptier, but somehow lighter, as if the accumulated weight of unspoken truths had created a pressure that had finally been released. Whether this confrontation would lead to lasting change remained uncertain, but something significant had shifted in the fabric of our family dynamic. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without cushioning it to protect their feelings. For the first time, they had listened without immediate dismissal. For the first time, Abigail had seen beyond her own experience to recognize mine. Small steps, perhaps, but steps nonetheless on a path that had previously seemed impassable. I moved through the apartment, turning off lights and straightening furniture disturbed during the confrontation. The birthday decorations no longer seemed like mockery, but rather like evidence of my own capacity for hope, for effort, for creation. Despite everything, I had tried to build something beautiful. That the attempt had failed was painful, but not defining. As I finally prepared for bed, emotionally exhausted, but strangely peaceful, I realized that the birthday gift I had most needed had arrived in unexpected form. the courage to speak truth, the strength to establish boundaries, and the beginning of a path toward either authentic reconciliation or honest acceptance of what could not be changed. The week following my birthday passed in a strange limbo, the emotional aftermath of the confrontation coloring every aspect of my daily routine. Teaching my classes required a performance of normalcy that drained my limited energy reserves. Conversations with colleagues felt superficial, divorced from the seismic shifts occurring in my personal life. Even simple tasks like grocery shopping or laundry seemed to require unusual concentration, my mind constantly replaying fragments of that night's conversation. My parents maintained radio silence, neither acknowledging our confrontation nor confirming the rescheduled dinner we had tentatively discussed. Their absence from my social media post remained conspicuous, a digital representation of our physical estrangement. I fluctuated between concern that I had permanently damaged our relationship and relief that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Thomas checked in daily, his casual texts, offering support without pressure. Still standing, he would ask, or need anything. Today, Samuel invited me for coffee between classes, carefully avoiding direct questions about my family, but providing a welcome distraction through discussions of literature and campus. Politics. Most surprising was Abigail, who called midweek with an invitation to lunch. We met at a small cafe equidistant from her marketing firm, and my campus, the neutral territory, appropriate for this new phase of our relationship. They're processing, she reported, when I inevitably asked about our parents. Mom's been unusually quiet. Dad's throwing himself into work even more than usual, which I didn't think was possible. Are they angry? I asked, bracing for the answer. She considered the question thoughtfully. Not exactly. Defensive, certainly. Confused, definitely. But I think underneath there's recognition. They've never had their parenting challenged so directly before. I didn't want to hurt them, I admitted. I just couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I know, she said, surprising me with her understanding. For what it's worth, I think it was necessary. For all of us. The conversation marked a subtle but significant shift in our sibling relationship. For the first time, we discussed our shared childhood without competitive comparison or defensive positioning. We acknowledged the different ways our parents' attention had shaped us. Her struggles with perfectionism and external validation, my battles with self-worth and emotional self-sufficiency. We were not instantly best friends, but we were perhaps becoming something we had never truly been before, allies in understanding our complex family dynamic. As the scheduled dinner approached, I steeled myself for another disappointment. Despite our conversation, despite the tentative plans experience, had taught me to expect absence rather than presence where my parents were concerned. I prepared less elaborately this time, ordering food rather than cooking from scratch, setting a simpler table in the dining room rather than transforming the backyard. Self-protection masquerading as practicality, a therapist might say, lowering expectations to minimize potential hurt. At 4:55 on Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my parents standing on the porch precisely on time for possibly the first time in our shared history. My father held a bottle of wine. My mother carried a small gift bag. Their expressions conveyed determination rather than enthusiasm. But they were here. They had shown up. The significance of that simple act was not lost on any of us. Dinner proceeded with careful conversation, each of us navigating the new terrain created by our confrontation. We avoided both excessive pleasantries and renewed conflict, instead establishing a tentative middle ground of cautious authenticity. My father discussed hospital politics less, and his actual work, more, revealing glimpses of the passion that drove his medical career. My mother asked questions about my teaching that suggested actual interest rather than polite obligation. Small shifts, but noticeable ones. We've been thinking about what you said, my father acknowledged as we finished dessert. About patterns and priorities, about showing up. My mother nodded, adding, "It's not easy to hear that you've failed someone you love, especially when the failure has been consistent over decades." I wasn't trying to attack you, I clarified. Just to be honest about how it felt to always come second. We understand that now, my father said, or we're trying to. I've scheduled sessions with Dr. Warner. He named a well-respected therapist whose practice focused on family systems. Initially for your mother and me, but eventually, perhaps for all of us together if you're willing. The suggestion represented such a dramatic departure from my father's typical approach to emotional challenges, ignore, dismiss, power, through that I momentarily struggled to respond. I would be open to that, I said finally. When you're ready. As they prepared to leave, my mother handed me the gift bag she had brought. It's not much, she said, but we wanted to acknowledge your birthday properly. Inside was a first edition copy of East of Eden, my favorite Steinbeck novel. The thoughtfulness of the gift so aligned with my actual interests, rather than their perception of what I should want, suggested they had listened more carefully than I realized during our years of limited contact. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. This is perfect. We have a lot to learn. My father acknowledged the admission remarkable from a man who built his identity around expertise and authority. A lot to repair. If you're willing to be patient with us, I am, I promised. As long as we're moving forward honestly, not just pretending for the sake of appearances. Their visit marked the beginning, rather than the completion of our healing process. In the months that followed, we experienced both progress and setbacks. Scheduled dinners were occasionally canceled for legitimate emergencies, but were always rescheduled promptly. Conversations sometimes devolved into old patterns before one of us recognized the slide and redirected. The therapy my father had suggested became a regular commitment, first for my parents individually, later, including Abigail and me, in various combinations. The change wasn't dramatic or immediate, but it was real. My mother began calling regularly brief check-ins that acknowledged my existence in her busy life. My father sent articles related to literature or education, small gestures of interest in my professional world. Abigail and I established a monthly lunch tradition, gradually building the sibling relationship we had never properly developed as children. The most profound changes, however, occurred within me. The confrontation had broken something open, releasing me from patterns of seeking validation from perpetually unavailable sources. I began investing more deeply in friendships that offered reciprocal care and attention. Thomas, Rebecca, and Samuel became regular fixtures in my life, the chosen family my social media post had referenced. My teaching improved as I brought more authentic energy to my classroom, no longer depleted by the constant emotional drain of unmet expectations. I joined a writing group, rediscovering passion for creative expression that had been dormant since college. I even began cautiously dating again, approaching romantic possibilities with clearer boundaries and healthier expectations. During one particularly insightful therapy session, Dr. Warner observed that my birthday disaster had ultimately been a gift, forcing a necessary confrontation that might otherwise have been avoided for additional decades. Some wounds can't heal until they're exposed to air, she noted. You opened a family system that had been operating on denial and avoidance. That's painful, but potentially transformative. She was right. The birthday that began with abandonment and ended in confrontation had initiated a painful but necessary process of growth for all of us. My parents would never become the perfectly attentive, emotionally available figures I had craved as a child. Our relationship would always carry scars from decades of neglect and mismatched priorities. But we were building something new from the wreckage of unmet expectations, something honest if imperfect. As my 36th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The growth, the setbacks, the painful honesty, the tentative healing. I had learned that speaking truth, while terrifying, was less destructive than maintaining comfortable lies. That boundaries, while initially perceived as rejection, could actually create space for healthier connection. That forgiveness did not require forgetting, but rather acknowledging hurt while choosing to move forward. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not determined by my parents' ability to recognize it. Their limitations were real, but not definitive. Their failure to prioritize me reflected their own unresolved issues, not my inherent value. I could love them while acknowledging their flaws, forgive them while maintaining necessary boundaries, appreciate their efforts while not depending on their validation. For my 36th birthday, I planned a gathering that reflected these lessons. Not an elaborate attempt to win approval or create a perfect family illusion, but a simple celebration with the people who had demonstrated their willingness to show up both literally and figuratively. My parents and Abigail were invited, their attendance hoped for, but not essential to the evening's success. Thomas, Rebecca, Samuel, and other friends who had supported me throughout the year formed the core guest list, the chosen family, who had earned their place through consistent presence. Whether my 36th celebration would unfold as planned remained to be seen. But regardless of who arrived or who sent last-minute regrets, I had given myself the most important gift, the knowledge that I was worthy of celebration, whether or not those who should have recognized it earliest could see it now. Some birthdays mark the simple passage of time. Others become turning points, catalysts for growth and change. My 35th had been painful, but ultimately transformative, forcing confrontations that cleared the way for healing, setting boundaries that allowed for authentic connection, and revealing truth that made genuine forgiveness possible. As we navigate the complicated landscapes of family relationships, we sometimes discover that the greatest gifts arrive in unexpected packaging, pain that leads to growth, confrontation that enables honesty, disappointment that forces necessary change. These are not the gifts we wish for, but often the ones we need most. Have you ever had a painful experience that ultimately led to personal growth or healing? What boundaries have you established in your own family relationships, and how did they change your dynamics? I'd love to hear your stories in the blank comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself, while difficult, can be the first step toward healing relationships that matter. Thank you for being part of my chosen family today, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.